So, as we continue to talk about college football recruiting, we now need to turn our attention to Tuscaloosa, where Alabama is playing host to several top prospects this weekend. Something we need to break down. But before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I have got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe the Crimson Tide are about to surge on the recruiting trail? Let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below, as those interactions seem small. They are massive to content creators such as myself. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And as I alluded to in the intro, though this may not be a weekend where 20, 30 prospects are in Tuscaloosa, I don't think it matters. When we look at the collection of talent that is in Tuscaloosa, it's head spinning, and we're going to start on the defensive side of the ball. As for those of you that have been around the channel will probably have picked up on, I'm a little bit biased towards that side of the ball. So anytime where we have these lists of prospects visiting any school, I'm probably going to start on the defensive side of the ball. And starting there should excite Alabama fans everywhere, because names at the safety position like Peyton Woodyard and KJ Bolden are in attendance. And if we start with KJ Bolden, we're talking about a top 10 player in the nation, the number one safety in the nation, and now with Dylan Raiola making the move from Arizona to Georgia, the number 2 player in the state of Georgia, but he was, for a long period of time, the number 1 player in the state of Georgia. And for Alabama, they would love nothing more than to go into Georgia back-to-back years and land the number 1 safety in the nation, a top prospect in Georgia's backyard. KJ Bolden is a prospect that pretty much any school in the nation would love to add in, and he's coming off of visits to institutions like Georgia and Ohio State. So if you're Alabama, you love that you get him after. I talk about this all the time. Recency bias is an absolutely real thing, and especially whenever we're talking about college football recruiting. These prospects go to these visits, and if you're able to get your visit last, you can make up a lot of ground. You can take advantage of the recency bias and the post-visit high that a lot of these prospects are on. So it's going to be interesting to see Alabama's pitch here, but let's get one thing understood. We know what Alabama does with defensive backs in terms of getting them, developing them, and sending them to the NFL. They have done it for quite a while now, and it doesn't look to be a trend that's going anywhere. So too, when we talk about Peyton Woodyard, a top 100 prospect in the nation, coming in specifically at number 75, the number 5 safety, and a top 10 player in the state of California, currently a Georgia Bulldogs commit, and Alabama would love to move the needle for Woodyard this weekend. Look, they're going to hit the safety position hard. I know Caleb Downs committed last year, but that's not going to stop them from going after guys like KJ Bolden or Peyton Woodyard if they think they can get them in their class, especially those 2 names in particular, because I think those are guys that are going to move the needle on the next level. Sticking in the defensive backfield, there are 2 more names we need to talk about. One of them, 5-star cornerback, top 5 player in the nation, and the number 1 cornerback in the nation, Ellis Robinson, currently committed to the Georgia Bulldogs out the state of Florida. And then the other one, Saban Brown, cornerback from modern day, top 100 prospect in the nation, a prospect Alabama fans would love to add in. And we will start with Ellis Robinson. Like I said, top 5 player in the nation. This is going to be a guy that Alabama pushes heavily for, and why not? Like I just said whenever we talked about the safeties, whenever we're talking about Alabama, we have got to acknowledge first and foremost who the head coach is and Nick Saban and his work with defensive backs, and then secondly, who the defensive back coach is, and that's Travaris Robinson, and the work he's put in. Not only at Alabama, but pretty much everywhere he's been where he has shown results. And if the Crimson Tide are indeed able to add in Jeremy Pruitt, that's just going to be another drop in the bucket because of Jeremy Pruitt's work with the safeties. And we always talk about recruiting is like a bucket where you're filling it up with water. At a certain point, those drops are going to fill the bucket up, and then it causes an overflow, something we've got to watch. Saban Brown, another top-tier prospect in California, would be a huge get for the Crimson Tide because there are several guys in the state of California thereafter. There's another guy from modern day who's visiting with Saban Brown, and it would really help move the needle for him. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but that's not all. We talk about defensive linemen and how Alabama will absolutely look to stack defensive line wins. We're about about to talk about a name, but there's a guy that plays for Mater Dei, and Aiden Breland, who's a top prospect in the nation, a top 100 player along that defensive line. So getting in a win for Saban Brown, though it wouldn't guarantee a Nathaniel Frazier committing to Alabama and Aiden Breland committing to Alabama, once again, it drops in a bucket that help Alabama's cause, something we have got to keep an eye out on. And I talked about how we would talk about a defensive lineman. Of course, we're talking about five-star defensive lineman, once again out the state of Georgia, Edric Houston. And one thing we need to understand, KJ Bolden and Edric Houston play for Buford, an absolute pipeline to the Crimson Tide. We're talking about players such as Jake Pope. We're talking about a guy last year in Justice Haynes that was teammates with Edric Houston and KJ Bolden. If they're able to get those guys in and have Justice Haynes and them on this visit talking to them, that could be huge for Alabama. Establishing that pipeline and maintaining it is going to be something Alabama looks to continue. But interesting to note, Dylan Raiola transfers to Buford. So Georgia's trying to say something about that pipeline that the Crimson Tide are trying to maintain. Something we're going to have to watch. But Edric Houston is a defensive lineman Alabama would love to get in. Top 20 prospect in the nation. They're going to be hitting that defensive line hard. It's a position they had a need for at last year, and you can bet your bottom dollar playing in the SEC, you're going to stack wins along the trenches as they come. Switching over to the offensive side of the football here, there are some names here that really excite me, including Julian Sayin. Julian Sayin may be an Alabama commit, but I have been on record several times now stating this guy is must land for the Crimson Tide because he can bring stability to that quarterback room. He is genuinely a five-star quarterback. And something interesting about Julian Sayin, I think after winning Elite 11 and then going to OT7 and continuing his impressive displays, I think the air around him has shifted a little bit. Not in terms of where he will end up, but in terms of how these national recruiting analysts perceive Julian Sayin. Because now I think they're realizing this isn't a guy that just has a high floor, meaning it's a really safe pick to bring into your room. A guy that has great footwork, great accuracy, a real solid arm. He also has an incredibly high ceiling, which is going to make him a really interesting name to keep up with. But part of the reason why I love he's on this weekend, we already talked about. The fact that I think he is a must-land prospect, and anytime Alabama can stay in his ear, I absolutely hope they do so. But the second reason is something we talk about extensively here on the channel. Your quarterbacks can be major pieces to your classes in helping add in other talented pieces. With Julian Sayin winning Elite 11 MVP, he can now talk to every single one of these guys here. Even the guys that won't be playing offense, such as an Edric Houston, a KJ Bolden, a Peyton Woodyard. He can get in their ears and say, hey, let's build something here. Let's build something. I'm coming in. I just had all these results at Elite 11 at OT7. Let's add in something and let's continue the standard that Alabama has put forth. And that could be an incredibly compelling pitch. Now, this doesn't have to be relegated to the quarterback position. It's just in football, the quarterbacks are viewed as a leader, but I do want to give credit where it's due. If we look at the class of 2023, Richard Young put in phenomenal work on the recruiting trail for the Crimson Tide. He was very vocal on Twitter trying to get other guys into that class, and if Julian Sayin can take that role this year, I think it will behoove the Crimson Tide's class. But he is not the only offensive guy we need to talk about. There's also Nathaniel Frazier, also from Mater Dei. I alluded to him whenever we were talking about Saban Brown. Nathaniel Frazier is a top 60 prospect in the nation, coming in at number 58 specifically, the number 4 running back and the number 4 player in the state of California. And I'm interested to see what Alabama does with running back this year after taking Justice Haynes and Richard Young. And though I know Richard Young didn't finish up as a 5-star, let's be honest here. That was a 5-star running back. Even fans that aren't fans of Alabama that I talk to admit to me they don't know how in the world he didn't end up as a 5-star back. That's as much of a 5-star running back as any running back I've seen in recent memory. So in my opinion, Alabama got 2 5-star running backs last year. Super interested to see what they do this year. And finally, we have Casey Poe, the interior offensive lineman. This is going to be a really interesting recruiting process as he's coming off of a visit to the Oklahoma Sooners that reportedly went well. But Alabama is going to be hitting that offensive line position hard, and Coach Wolford has been fantastic in my opinion. Just look at what Alabama got last year in recruiting, and really, if we want to get into the X's and O's, look at how the offensive line improved. And remember, that was an offensive line that the year before Coach Eric Wolford took it over, lost a guy to the first round. So it was an offensive line that struggled under Doug Marrone. Then they lost a guy that was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. Coach Eric Wolford inherited that line without a top 10 pick and an offensive line that had struggled, and they were better than the year before. That is when I had supreme faith in Coach Eric Wolford. And then we saw how he finished up that recruiting cycle last year for Alabama. Very excited for what the future holds along the offensive line. Very excited to see how the unit continues to progress. We just talked about it yesterday. If you didn't catch that video, please go do so. But as we wind this video down, I want to put a nice bow on it and talk about where Alabama currently sits in recruiting. Where the Crimson Tide are outside the top 25 recruiting classes in the nation. And I know there may be those out there that raise their eyebrows to that, but for those of us that have followed recruiting, you're not worried in the least. It's June. There's nothing but time, opportunity, and space out in front of every school out there, and I take this approach no matter the school, no matter if it's Alabama, you name the school, I'm probably going to be very consistent in this approach, that it's June. July is going to be a hotbed for commitments, but we've seen Alabama be at the number 55 class in the nation, number 60 class in the nation in April, May, and then vault to the number 1 class in the nation where they finish. So if you're an Alabama fan, you're absolutely not at all concerned, especially when we start really taking into account the nuance of this class. Because yes, the class may sit at number 27 in the nation, but we also need to understand they're number 27 in the nation with 8 prospects. So they have significantly less than a lot of your schools within the top 10. But that does not mean this class isn't hyper impressive. Because if we look at the average recruit rank, it tells the full story here. The average recruit rank for the Alabama class sits at a 94.36, showing just how talented it is. And when we take a top-down look, Alabama has 3 5-stars out of the 8 commits. 6 of the 8 are top 200 prospects. 7 of the 8 are 4-stars. The one 3-star that there is Joseph Ionata, someone who personally I feel like is really underrated, a guard that I think is going to be a big pickup for Alabama. So the Crimson Tide are recruiting at an elite level, and that should surprise absolutely nobody. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.